genel izleyici kitlesi için uygundur.
Saat Farkı'ndan merhabalar. Farklı ülkelerden konuklarla bölgesel ve küresel meselelere dair farklı perspektiflere yer vermeye çalışıyoruz her hafta. Dünyayı Ekotürk ekranında buluşturuyoruz. Bu hafta biraz Avrupa konuşacağız. Brüksel'e uzanacağız. Brüksel merkezli düşünce kuruluşu Avrupa Komşuluk Konseyi, European Neighborhood Council Direktörü Samuel Doveri Vesterbye bizlerle biraz Trump dönemi özellikle Avrupa-AB ilişkilerini, Türkiye-Avrupa Birliği ilişkilerini özellikle kendisi çünkü Türkiye, Avrupa ve bilhassa Orta Asya ülkeleri üzerine çalışan bir uzman. Tüm bunları konuşmaya çalışacağız süremiz el verdiğince. Mr. Samuel, hi, welcome to my show. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me on your show. Çok teşekkürler.
Çok teşekkür ederim Samuel. Shall I continue in Turkish or English?
Well, I'm still working on my Turkish, so maybe in a few years from
Maybe,
now. But for
maybe
now in
next
English.
time. Okay, teşekkür ederim. Thank you. Well, Samuel, I have a lot to talk with you today regarding, of course, Turkey-EU relations, Central Asia-related issues. But I would like to start with a broader European Union issue, actually, because under second Trump presidency, you know, America seems to be withdrawing. The threat from Russia has been mounting. So Europe is in some trouble, as we see from here. And recently, Europe Day was celebrated. The Schuman Declaration, which laid the foundations of the European Union, was signed some 75 years ago. So I would like to start with the broader European idea, European values. How do you see from Brussels the way the European Union is today, especially as transatlantic relations have been crumbling under second Trump presidency? What kind of threats, what kind of challenges Europe faces? A second Trump presidency is a challenge, a real test for Europe, or it's a wake-up call, it's an opportunity, or it's a serious threat? What do you think?
Well, the European Union was a major benefactor of globalization and of free trade around the world since the fall of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s. No countries like the European countries, including also Turkey, have been able to ride the wave of international trade, of growth, of funding, and of indirectly American security protection. And that has been, of course, a benefit because often every euro you spend on defense is taken away from welfare or somewhere else. And so for a very long period of time, the European Union was able to spend a lot on its citizens and also on being able to not worry about security so much. In recent years, what we've seen is that the main national security concern or threat of the United States, which by all means continues to be very much if not the real world superpower, has shifted away from what used to be a threat of Russia or the Soviet Union and towards China instead.
Right.
I think it's perfectly legitimate and understandable that the United States has this conception of threat. It is by all means Washington's realistic main threat today because China poses many problems for the United States. However, for countries like Poland, Turkey, Italy, Netherlands, even UK and Norway, that's simply not the case. Russia is far closer. Russia has militarized in the Black Sea. Russia has posed a problem in Crimea. Russia has posed a huge amount of problems in the Caucasus, which concerns us on the European continent to a whole different degree. And that's where you see the divergence in the transatlantic rift between Europe and the United States.
Mr. Samuel, I would like to hear at this point, ask you, because you also touched upon, of course, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, also on the other hand, China as a rising threat, especially for the US, not all in the West, but how all these geopolitical changes, I don't know, in recent years especially, place Turkey in the eyes of Europe, because we have been witnessing reports, remarks, especially by the Western leaders, underlining Turkey's position. But on the other hand, of course, there are still issues. First of all, let me ask you, how do you see from Brussels Turkey's role in European defense and the current NATO architecture? And after that, I will ask you particularly European Parliament's recent report, and I'm going to ask you if these two are related to each other or not.
Well, I think it's very important to remember that Turkey is a very important country on the European continent in terms of size, in terms of economic interaction with the European Union, in terms of being a NATO member, and in terms of having provided a very substantial part of some of our leading economies' supply chains over the many last years, not to mention its sheer geographical positioning as a land bridge to Asia. Now, when we look at defense and security and we look at accession, I think it's pretty important to differentiate between the two. In one case, Turkey is an accession country. It has been an accession country for a very long time, and there are reasons for why that accession has stalled. I, as the director of the European Neighbourhood Council, an EU-funded think tank, have often criticized EU member countries because there's been some politically motivated blockages in the past, which I think can be deemed unfair towards Ankara. Simultaneously, one also has to be realistic about the fact that the Turkish government over the last 20 years has done anything but abide by the necessary criteria of democracy and judicial independence, which have rendered it very difficult also for the advocates of accession to pursue that further. So that is a little bit the situation with regards to that. Now, when we talk, but that is with regards to accession and with regards to entering the EU.
Yeah.
When it comes to defense and security, I don't know if you want to say unfortunately or fortunately, but the reality is such that that goes beyond the accession process. Today, there is national security threats, as mentioned before, linked to Russia. And there is absolutely an appetite by European member states to work far more closely with the Turkish Republic or government in order to have a common solution for shared defense, especially at a time in which there are some questions with regards to the transatlantic relationship, as we spoke about before, and also some questions with regards to the efficiency of NATO.
Well, so speaking of the European Parliament's recent report, I would like to elaborate on this a little bit before moving on to the other topic. But as you also know, the report reaffirmed that Turkey's accession process must remain frozen. Do you see any realistic path forward for reviving accession talks at this point? And also, because you also pointed out that there were some political reasons for that. How do you see, because the report cites democratic backsliding in Turkey, as you know, is this kind of, is it a real concern, or there are still some other calculations or political motivations behind this? And what do you see as the future, forward?
Well, I think that the report speaks for itself. And I think that the parliamentarians and also the European Commission has, on repeated and numerous occasions, I think quite objectively made it quite clear that there is backsliding with regards to democracy in Turkey. This is a concern both from an institutional and member state point of view within the within the context of the accession process, but it is also very much a concern with regards to investment into Turkey. And of course, that concerns the business community gravely. Now, with regards to whether there is also varying appetite for Turkish accession inside the European Union, I think that's also fair to say that that is very much true. And not every single member state views Turkey in the same way and as positively. But I think we must also be honest and realistic that these two factors can exist hand in hand.
Mr. Samuel, I will also ask you about the, before that actually, the Central Asia issue I would like to ask you with, but I have seen a very interesting commentary, an op-ed on The Economist recently. The title is Europe's Reluctant Reset with Turkey. As the report or the op-ed says, America is withdrawing, the threat from Russia is mounting, Ukraine is on the defensive. Despite pledges of new spending, arms production remains too low for comfort. Fear not, Europeans. Erdogan has your back. Quote. Is this a common sentiment in all other European capitals regarding Turkey's position? Because especially after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, as you also pointed out, Turkey's role in regional affairs, also in a lot of conflicts, Turkey's role has been really increased. This op-ed reflects the common general sentiment in the European Union countries and also in Europe in general?
I think that the past few years, when we look at the engagement level that we've seen between British, German, French, and Turkish intelligence community, diplomatic community, as well as the armed forces, developments and meetings have taken place, which I had never witnessed in my career. And in that sense, I can only say that that's an extremely positive step, and it's entirely motivated by geoeconomics and geopolitics.
Well, let's come to Central Asia, because it is one of your area of expertise. And as you know, EU leaders, the European Union leaders, held their first ever summits in Samarkand recently, back in April. Could you also explain us Brussels' sudden, I will use this word, but I don't know if you agree, sudden interest in the region, and how does Turkey factor into this strategic calculus? Also, another point, speaking of the Turkic states, as you know, the recognition of the Greek Cyprus administration by the Turkic states also actually implies that the EU's growing influence in the region. How do you explain this the first ever summit first, and also the recognition of these Turkic states, and how does this Cyprus-Cyprus issue complicate things between Turkey and European countries?
Yeah, let me actually just answer one more point about the previous question, and then I'm happy to move on to Central Asia and to talk about that topic. Maybe one thing I wanted to add before, which I forgot to add, is that the relationship between Turkey and the EU and its member states has not only increased in terms of military-to-military communication and meetings between member states, but also what we've seen is that there is a huge willingness for example, a country like Germany to engage more with Turkey, especially within a military and security cooperation level. And so I think it's important to mention that a lot of what used to be a relationship of supply chains and trade may also likely see more military industrial production in Turkey by German and other EU European companies. So there is really quite a substantial amount of cooperation which is likely to take place over the upcoming months and years. With regards to Central Asia and the question that you just asked to me, I think it's important to note that when we look at the relationship between the EU and Central Asia, I have worked on this file for a substantial amount of time. And what I've seen is that when I was working on policy advice on Central Asia for the EU 10 years ago, the interest was low, lukewarm at best. Since the Russia's war against Ukraine, what we've seen is that there's a huge increase in funding, also an increase in interest in bilateral and multilateral meetings, as well as the release of low-interest loans by EBRD and other policy tools like the EU's Global Gateway, and also a lot of private sector involvement in the region, especially in connecting the so-called Trans-Caspian corridor, which goes through Turkey, as well as through Georgia, and as well as through Azerbaijan and into Central Asia, and also facilitating the regional integration of Central Asia. Another important component has also been the development of critical raw materials, the mining, and also the production of various types of critical raw material related goods. Because as we know, Central Asia, of course, is a very important region when it comes to a whole range of critical raw materials like tungsten and germanium and titanium and many others. And then finally, the development of renewable energy has also been a very, very high policy point for the EU in the region. For example, the Rogun Dam and hydroelectricity in Tajikistan, but also hydrogen development in Kazakhstan and solar power development as well in Kazakhstan.
Samuel, we have a few minutes left. Could you please elaborate also, because you described, I remember from your posts on social media, Turkey has pushed for Northern Cyprus as an observer in the Organization of Turkic States as a strategic mistake. Could you quickly elaborate on that, please? Why was that a strategic mistake, do you think?
Well, it was a strategic mistake in the sense that it came at the wrong time. The Cyprus question is, of course, a national priority question for the Republic of Turkey, and I'm not disputing that. However, I argue that this is one strategic priority, but an arguably far larger geopolitical strategic priority is the one of connecting the Turkic countries in Central Asia and Caucasus with Turkey, something which has been a long-standing priority of Ankara for a very long time and has had failed opportunities in the past. So in order for that not to be a failed opportunity today, I had long argued that it was a mistake to push for Ankara's policy vis-a-vis Cyprus in Central Asia at this time, because unfortunately it posed the risk of derailing the opportunity of the EU's monetary firepower and Turkey's very important cultural diplomacy in the region as a Turkic country to be able to cooperate together and to even bring some of the critical raw materials mined and processed in the Caucasus and Central Asia into the Turkish economic sphere, which of course would also be useful for Turkey to be able to scale up economically.
I see. Well, Samuel, actually, I have a lot of questions left for you to discuss more, but hopefully next time, maybe, perhaps you visit Istanbul a lot, so maybe next time. Unfortunately, the time is up, but thank you very much for joining me today. Çok teşekkür ederim.
Rica ederim. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Evet, Saat Farkı'nda bu hafta Brüksel'den bir düşünce kuruluşu, Avrupa Komşuluk Konseyi, European Neighborhood Council direktörü Samuel Vesterbye'yi ağırladık. Samuel Doveri Vesterbye'yi ağırladık. Biraz Avrupa'yı konuştuk, Avrupa-ABD ilişkilerini, Avrupa Birliği-Türkiye ilişkilerini, özellikle Avrupa Parlamentosu'nun son kararı ışığında biraz bu konuları konuşmaya çalıştık. Önümüzdeki hafta yine farklı bir konuyla, farklı bir konukla karşınızda olmak dileğiyle. Hoşça kalın.